Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Phobias from 2021. So, immediately I would go on and find that you could possibly rent this movie on an Amazon or a Vudu, VUDU. I'm going to go on and give you a free option here in a second. You can go on to Google Play Store and immediately you can download an app after you search the word TV Crush. You can find an app that is to say HD movies on it and it has this little king crown. Go ahead and download that and you'll be able to see Phobias for absolutely free. Some of it might be with subtitled like things, but sometimes kind of like with maybe how possibly quiet this movie is. Maybe you might need the subtitles, not quite sure. But either way, it's a convenient way to watch this movie easily for free. You can also go onto Google searches and search for apps like letter C movies. So a letter and then a word. You can download that app and there, in fact, be able to watch any number of things for absolutely free. And like if you are thinking like HBO exclusives, oh, I won't be able to watch any of that, or Stars or Showtime, you can see it all right there on that app. Or you can go on and find a Google search for an app called Fox HD Movies. The logo will say so, but the title will say something different. It'll say Play 1080p HD Movies. And so yeah, that's kind of what I recommend to people, to go on and find certain apps. Or you can just go on and go through a Google Play Store search and just kind of search the word movie apps, and there's several things that you will eventually go on and find to find a movie, to see it for absolutely free without paying for any kind of fees of anything of any kind, unless you want ads removed from any number of watchable things. So, teeing up and talking about this movie, what is Phobias about? Well, Phobias is this kind of interesting variety film where we, of course, have our characters that are to be put in these fear scenarios, and there is to be a story that connects all of these characters together into this one Outpost 37 environment, where we go on and find out that the government is trying to harness all these people's fears and to make some gas out of it. So it's kind of like if you guys are to be familiar with the DC comic book character Scarecrow, or really if you've ever seen the movie Batman Begins or the show Titans, which it would be like season 3 of that, then you know exactly who I'm talking about as far as Scarecrow goes. So so the government is using this fear toxin against its own country, and so that kind of makes for a very interesting story. But it's really just to see like all of these little small stories play out for us to, I guess, invest in these characters to do what is to go on by the end of this film, by the end of this movie. So, with that said, I eventually will at first go on and like name off all the phobias, because I like luckily like saw those right away. I'm like, oh, so like they're showcasing what phobia it is, and I will also deliver the definition of each one of those in case anybody like didn't quite understand or whatever from the little scenes that otherwise are provided, what exactly any of this means. So so with that said, what would be the grading system of this film? I would honestly say if people were to rent this movie, I wouldn't blame you. This is actually a fun film. I really did like it, and it seemed that there was some good connecting of stuff of the build of this movie, and it's only an hour and 25 minutes, a very reasonable film. I'm like, man, that's like an animated movie kind of time, and I was like surprised of how just kind of quick flowing that this movie was, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. So yeah, I would say that this is probably, I would say it's an interesting variety movie. Like I've seen certain horror variety films like Burning Palms, which can kind of feel familiar to this, or possibly Holidays, which had like Seth Green in it, and really that kind of goes on and takes like if every holiday had some kind of weird horrific vibe to it. Some of the stories in that are okay, and some of them are just kind of really out there, and people may not like every single one of them, but it is what it is. Slice and dice of variety. So, with that said, so yeah, I would say grading wise, this would have to be a solid good film. Uh, like I wish that there was like we didn't have to see the first story right away, because immediately when what plays out later, I'm just like I would have liked for the first story to not be the first story, but it makes all the sense in the world to have this kind of build up and having us like invest in Johnny right away, uh, to see how this all plays out. So, uh, so yes, this is a solid good movie. So definitely a thumbs up. Would recommend people seeing this film, and hoping that eventually after this you would probably go out of your way to say you've seen this film via a free means or whichever, because phobia movies are kind of interesting at some point. Except for the ones that are just freaking gross as f. Like, yeah, I want to see arachnophobia. No. Uh, One thing that I don't like spider friggin' movies. Not that I have like this gross out thing with spiders. It's just like why watch a spider film? But anyways, I think it's time to say that it's about that time again to just go into spoilers about this one. I've spoken for long enough about this movie. So let me know in the comments below what your phobia is. The fear of a stupid man talking for far too long. Yeah, I get it. I got it. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you get to spoil this movie. So, the very first fear is robophobia, which immediately I'm like, what is he like? Fear robots? And I looked further into the definition of it, and it's like, well, it's like the fear of robots, but it's like also like artificial life forms. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so they went to the artificial life form thing or artificial intelligence. Like, oh, okay. So I don't quite get why exactly Johnny, who's to be the first character up in this story, is to be who he is if he technically has a fear of a slicing and dicing of technology. But anyways, so in the very beginning of this film, we have Johnny who goes on to make it to this convenience store, and he of course is just kind of buying stuff up, possibly buying medications and some sort of things to help his sick father. We of course have Johnny that's desperately asking to this clerk. It's like, hey, can you just shave off $1 or $2 off of this price, please, for me? And the store clerk is just like, no, like, what do you think? I give you like family friendly discounts? No. That's not what he says, but that's what I wanted to say in my mind. All of a sudden, we have guys from behind Johnny that are just laughing, and so Johnny walks off. All of a sudden, to have Dirk and a bunch of bullied men, thugs of sorts, go on and are to find Johnny, and we of course have Dirk, who is to tell Johnny, it's like, hey, you shouldn't have looked at me like you looked at me in that store. You better not go on and ever come to this store again. And so all of a sudden, Dirk and his men start beating this guy up because they just don't like him. It's probably a race thing, not quite sure, but it is what it is with this story. So they beat this guy up, and so he walks on home, is to see one of his apartment complex neighbors who have their door wide open, and a couple is yelling at one another. Not quite sure what they're saying, but I don't think it really matters. It just matters that they're yelling at a very high pitched, and a guy's like, hey, what are you looking at, as he closes the door. I would have been just like, what, is that guy gonna come with a number of thugs to just start beating up on Johnny and like never come to this apartment building ever again? Like, what the like, is he allowed anywhere? So Johnny goes to his apartment and is to give his sickly dad, who is in this wheelchair and in this like oxygen like breathing tube thing. He gives him food, and all of a sudden his father realizes that his son is bruised, and he's like, oh my god, what happened to you? And he's like, don't, like, it's fine. So we go on, and we of course have Johnny, that is to have this keyboard in his backpack. Come to find out, this guy's to be some hacker, which I'm like, okay, for a guy that fears technology, not exactly sure why he's hacking away for what it doesn't quite make sense. This guy is going on to find out information about these bullies, about like all he can. So Johnny goes on, and all of a sudden there is someone talking back to him. I'm like, what is this, War Games? Would you like to play a game? Because basically that's what it is. All of a sudden this artificial intelligence is saying hello. It's like, black shirt, you have a camera. Would you like some help? And all of a sudden we have Johnny, who gets a phone call, and he's like, oh, what is this? Hello? And all of a sudden it is this artificial life form that is to want to help Johnny, and all he needs is his permission to do so, because this artificial life form wants to take down bad people, and he wants to help out Johnny in his situation. So Johnny goes on, and he agrees to this. All of a sudden we have Johnny hearing screaming from another apartment room, to go on and find out as he goes and looks out, is like, what the is going on? All of a sudden the room of which that his neighbors were at, where we had the two couple who were fighting, all of a sudden the one man is now burnt to a crisp. We're like, oh my god, what the fuck? Like, that seemed kind of rando. But we find out eventually what this does, or what this means. So Johnny goes on, and he, of course, to make it back to this convenience store, because he desperately needs to go on to go to this one convenience store, because I guess it's cheaper than a lot of others, to get this fruit that his father is to like. And maybe this is just the most convenient place to walk to, yada, yada, yada. So Johnny, of course, is to make it to this convenience store, where, of course, he's confronted by Dirk and a number of thugs yet again. Hey, man, I thought you weren't going to come back here. I don't know why I had that accent, but it is what it is. So Johnny's like, come on, man, like, really? And so all of a sudden he gets his phone, he picks it up, and the person's like, well, hey, like, do you want me to, like, deal with this? And Johnny's like, fine. do it. All of a sudden, Dirk is to have his cell phone burst him into flames, and so this guy doesn't even bother to like stop, drop, and roll, nothing. Like he just starts burning it up, and he keels over and dies. I'm like, oh my god. So all of a sudden we go on and we have Johnny going to this convenience store, getting some food, and I'm sure he's just like, yeah, like freaking Dirk, you're freaking dead. Now these guys aren't going to bother me anymore because I'm sure they're going to be a million miles away thinking that they're probably going to burn to a crisp if they deal with me. So Johnny's feeling good for once, for one freaking day. He goes back to his place, and him and his father are really having a good time, and like they're both eating this fruit, and they're like, yeah, it's so good today, this fruit. Yeah. All of a sudden, Johnny is to get this phone call, and it's the artificial life form again, the artificial intelligence thing. And so now this thing is telling Johnny, it's like, well, hey, like, feels kind of bad that you're like having your father just kind of limp on. Like, don't you want to just end his life so that way like stop his pain, stop his suffering? And Johnny's like, no, like my dad loves like me being here, like he loves it here, like he loves being with me. And so like the artificial intelligence is telling Johnny, it's like, well, it seems like you're like being a very bad person by letting this guy just kind of limp on in misery and pain. And so Johnny realizes like, oh my god, like this thing's gonna come up the way with coming after me now. So all of a sudden, both Johnny and his father are trying to get the heck out of there, realizing that this thing may come for them. All of a sudden, we just end up seeing this weird man who is made out of, or person that is made out of lightning come, like, walking down. And so Johnny and his dad are being met by this thing, this electrical thing that is telling Johnny that he needs to go on and find somebody else who is evil, who is bad, that that he can feed to this artificial intelligence. And so Johnny is just like, cue us transitioning to Outpost 37. We all of a sudden have this police officer who's kind of wheeling in this this prisoner. He's just like, "Hey, buddy, wake up! Like we're here soon." All of a sudden, we find out that this new prisoner is, of course, to be Johnny at this Outpost 37. And like, what the heck? Just what? What happened here? Like, it just stopped. And so, like, what happened to Johnny's dad? Like, why is he here now? I'm confused. So we just push on to the very next story. And we have Johnny, who is to be talking to Dr. Wright here. Dr. Wright. And kind of telling him, it's like, well, hey, like get ready to like be like the next person on the chopping block, because we're gonna have to go through a number of other people. And it seems like most of the time they're having Johnny, like once he finally does get into one of these rooms, they mostly just have him watch to kind of, I guess, build up his fear. So when then his time comes, like, he can go on and, like, really be afraid of what they're going to do to him at some point. So the next story up, of course, is a girl named Sammy, who is with a guy named Harry. So Sammy, of course, had this fear called Vehophobia. So Veho phobia. Phobia. And this phobia is a fear of driving. I guess this is to happen when somebody used to have a very horrible accident, and so it kind of spuns off of that. So we have Sammy, who is to drop off this guy named Harry at some bus stop. Because I guess both of them are finally done with one another. And so, like, they're both finally, I guess, breaking up because something horrible happened. So, Viho goes, or Sammy, or Viho. Sammy goes into her car and is to start driving on. And so all of a sudden, while she's driving, we weirdly have it to where the radio station just starts going cattywampus. And like the volume keeps going up and down, up and down. This window keeps trying to roll itself down. Sammy's trying to roll it back up. All of a sudden, it seems like there's somebody behind the back seat. Sammy kind of looks back, and she's like, "Okay, like, was there somebody back there?" Sammy all of a sudden is to, at some point, have her car just stop working. And so she kind of lifts up the hood and she's kind of looking around, seeing what the problem is. She closes the hood and all of a sudden sees a shadow by the hood. She's like, oh my god, what was that? Sammy goes on back into the car and is to start her engine back up, and she's like, okay, like, whatever was that? So all of a sudden, we have bizarrely this old man appearing in Sammy's back seat and is starting to choke her with her necklace or her seatbelt or any number of things, just choking away. And so Sammy's like, and then things stop. And we're like, what the is going on with this woman? Like, is she seeing this? Is this a ghost story? What is going on? So, all of a sudden, we end up finding out that both Sammy and Harry had gotten very desperate. Maybe they consistently do this because they keep going on these road trips and eventually they never get caught. Not quite sure. But both Sammy and Harry get desperate. And so what they do is they decide that they're going to go and find a random person and try to mug them. They get these black masks on, which I don't get why the girl in the car has a black mask because license plate, but somebody could immediately just like click, click, like, oh, the license plate is GG55 blah blah blah, and donezo. So Sammy's in the driver's seat. Harry's gonna have to go with a knife. Don't mess with me, old man. Don't with me. I'm busy. I got things to do. Almost stabbing somebody. So Harry is to jump out at this old man and be like, hey, give me your money, old man. Give me your money. And the guy's like, you don't have the balls to take money from me. And the whole guy just starts walking off, like right in Harry's face. And Harry does nothing. Harry's just like, well, yeah, I guess I'm not. All of a sudden, Sammy takes her car and she starts revving on the engine. She's like, She runs this guy down and has him like smack into the hood of the car and falls over. They jack his stuff and they leave. And so now we have figured it out that eventually Sammy in his car is to have eventually been sent to prison. She had been caught, and there had been a body of from this trunk that had opened up showing this body, and that is how she got to where she was, being the test subject of this Outpost 37, because it was either Johnny's turn or it was Sammy's turn, and Sammy went instead of Harry. And so Harry is just kind of going on and just kind of waiting for his turn to happen at some point. Just like continuing to just kind of ride the pine or being on deck, but having other people going instead. So, kind of a very interesting story, but so when Sammy is put in this weird, goofy rig that we see in like the thumbnail, and maybe that thumbnail might change, but like there's this weird, goofy like rig that it looks like she's getting like electrocuted into her brain to have all these fears being generated, and she's just shaking with this like big, massive looking metal headgear thing on, and like she's being strapped in and just she's having to remember these fears, and all of a sudden this fear liquid is coming from out of her brain, and like they're just trying to get all the like they're just trying to generate fear from out of this girl to collect all of this kind of fear serum from out of these people's brain, because I guess there's a part of the brain that produces fear, and so they're trying to siphon that out of people. So, hopefully I explained that well enough. I just wanted to get into the story, and then I kind of did the aftermath stuff afterwards. So, going on next. So, we of course have it where we have a story where Johnny is still like on deck, just like, hey man, like I will volunteer myself to go next. Like I'll go next. And Dr. Wright is just like, it doesn't work that way. Like, no, we're gonna take this other girl who just came in here, we're gonna strap her in, and we're gonna showcase her fear, or we're gonna do her story. Like, the people can't actually see what the fear is. They're just kind of seeing this liquid just being, like, coming from out of this small tube of things, and that's all we really see from the outside. Like, we're not actually seeing a TV screen that's showing us her fear. We just see the story, is what happens. So, transitioning. Now we, of course, have a girl who, of course, is to go by the name of Emma? I'm hoping it's Emma. So I'm wrong about this. So we have Emma, who is to have this fear called Phobia. EPHEBI phobia. Evidently, this fear is fear of youth. Fear of the young, which is also just kind of absurd, of which the way of this teacher. This woman is a teacher, and she has this fear of youth. Little confused by this story, but, like, I guess they had to, like, figure it out how this girl can eventually become afraid of youth. So, we go on, we have this teacher that, of course, is making her way home. And she's calling her husband, and it's like, hey, how are things? Blah, blah, kind of daily checkup. And so it seems like her husband is going to be kind of out of town, kind of just out, so to speak. I don't remember exactly what the whole case was, but it doesn't really matter. So all of a sudden, this teacher is grading these papers, and we have the husband that is desperately just wanting for them to just kind of like, hey, can we just put our jobs on hold, and can we both just kind of have a getaway and just have fun? And the teacher is just like, well, like, Like, I would love to do that, but like these grading these papers is really complicated. It's really challenging. And so he's like, okay, well, I'll be out. Like, they're still having this conversation through the phone. And so we, of course, go on and have this text feed that this teacher is having with this other person. And she's saying, it's like, well, hey, he's gone. You can come over. And so this teacher hasn't really heard much of anything from this other person. And so she's like putting 3 question marks. And then she's just kind of like, well, I guess he's just not going to respond. I guess I'm just going to go to bed. We'll see what happens. Like, let's see if he respond or this person responds the next day. So all of a sudden, we have this teacher who goes on and rests her head. She's sleeping. All of a sudden, she, of course, to kind of hear some rumblings. Doorbell. She goes to the doorbell, and nobody's out there. She goes back to her house. All of a sudden, we have this brick come flying through the window. The teacher grabs the brick. It says, naughty teacher. And all of a sudden, there's to be this kind of mirrored lipstick thing, realizing that now the teacher's had somebody in her house. She tries to call the police. She can't call the police. She goes and tries to find her cell phone, realizing that the cell phone is so damaged that she can't even use it. So all of a sudden we find out that one of the teacher's students is to appear, Blair, and is to grab onto this teacher, force her down these flight of stairs to meet up with these 2 other kids called Grady and Isaac. So we find out from these kids that this teacher had gone on and had an affair with possibly parents of her students. Maybe it was just like she just stumbled upon these people and it was all a coincidence, or maybe she purposely did that. Maybe at a teacher's conference, maybe when possibly some parent wasn't or was there, and so on and so, like, anything could happen. So all of a sudden, we find out that the kids were to find out that their dad was having an affair on their teacher. And so now they decide that they want to go after her to seek revenge, possibly after killing their own father, maybe, not quite sure. Maybe it ruined this guy's marriage. A lot of things are just kind of up in the air. It's too vague. I'm not quite sure. So we go on and we have Blair, who is telling this teacher to start disrobing a little bit, like taking off her shirt and whatever, because they want to have a little foreplay before they actually go on to the main events, so to speak. And so this teacher is realizing that this isn't going to end well, because of course not. She's technically outnumbered here. So the teacher goes on and she tries to defend herself, grabbing one of these kids, smacking him against this coffee table, and he dies from the impact. This teacher starts going on and running off, trying to get out of this place. Because these people are coming up with plans of like curb stomping her and then just killing her somehow in a very quick-like manner. And Blair wants to make an example of her, I guess. So what happens is we, of course, have the teacher who runs out in front of her yard and all of a sudden the other kid is to start going after this teacher. And so now the teacher's really beating up this student. And so Blair goes on and she is to call the police. And so all of a sudden, we have the students here who are in the right and the teacher is in the wrong because it's their word against hers. And so the student is telling these people, it's like, yeah, like what we did was like we were just trying to have some fun. Like we were going on and like playing ding dong ditch and whatever. Like we were just having fun with this teacher, but man, did it go too far. Man, did it escalate. And like this teacher was just out for us. So all of a sudden, we have this teacher that's being hauled away, and these kids are to like completely be absolved of all this. When the teacher goes on and tries to get at one of these kids because of how upset she is that they kind of turn this all on her, all of a sudden one of the parents is trying to attack this woman. It gets freaking crazy. So the teacher ends up getting booked and hauled away. And so it's like, oh my god, that was a really interesting story. So, pushing on. So, with that story, we just see another kind of leaving of fear going out of this tube from this other person. And we're still seeing like them getting electrified and whatever to just produce this fear serum. And so Johnny is to go on and meet a number of other like inmate characters. And like of course there's some unsavory people which we'll find out their stories. And we find out that there's some people that are just consistently living in fear. And they're like thinking that like somebody's walking out of the shadows and like, ah, and they're like, hey, like calm down, like nobody's really there. So we go on, and next up we have another story that of course is to be called Hoplophobia or Hoplophobia. This of course is a fear of an armed civilian or a fear of firearms. So, like, imagine if anybody is to like somehow be wielding anything that seems like a weapon at all. Like having us all of a sudden have a person with possibly even something as small as a fork in their hand could all of a sudden be considered to one person be a weapon, and this person is just eventually going to lose their mind and just start firing away via them just starting to beat people up or whatever. Anything could possibly be considered a weapon for this person, crazily enough. So we have it where we have a character called where are we here? I think this is Alma. So this woman is to be a SWAT member. So she goes in, bum rushes in with a number of the SWAT team, and so she's kind of going through, kind of scanning all the rooms, and so all of a sudden she kind of goes and kind of puts her gun into a room, but not her whole body into a room, and fires, and so all of a sudden she realizes that she had accidentally shot some kid. And she's very shaken by all that, to the point of all of a sudden she's looking at her gun and she like just can't, like she can't realize what she had done. her superior is going and putting his hand on the shoulder or her shoulders, like, hey, like, did the best he could. So this girl goes off, and I think she no longer becomes a police officer anymore. I think that time is like riding off into the sunset after that. So all of a sudden, we of course have it where this girl is kind of going through her pots and pans and her dishes, and all of a sudden she sees this knife, and she's kind of wiping it with soap, and then she like has this knife in her hands, and she's like, "Oh my god, it's a weapon!" So she like kind of just drops it. She just can't handle it. So we go on and have this character who is going out to just dinner with her son. It's like, well, yeah, like, let's just kind of go out. Let's try to have fun. Let's just go and have dinner somewhere. So all of a sudden, we have them eating dinner. And so we have it where it seems that there is a number of people who all break into this restaurant. And so since this girl has some SWAT previous experience, she's kind of jumping in and starting to take down all of these thugs, all these robbers, all of these guys. And so all of a sudden we have this woman who's kind of having this one person in this chokehold. And we find out that this woman is holding up this waitress. And she doesn't, like, we have this woman that doesn't realize where she's at. But she, like, took out all these people that weren't actually, like, criminals. She just took out normal people that I guess some way or another, like, they had some kind of something that made them armed citizens in her brain, which just made it to where all of a sudden there was this robbery that just came into this one diner and was holding them up, and she just started taking all these people down. And so yeah, she ends up going on and getting arrested for that because she went on and did that. I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. So we now go on and transition. So Johnny's going to bed for the night, and we of course have him talking to some girl. It was actually Macy Gray. I was like, hey, Macy Gray, it's been a while since I've seen Macy Gray. Because I remember always watching like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, and of course she's kind of like singing that song. I've seen her in like one of the, like, I think she's in one of the scary movies, but it's been a while since I've seen Macy Gray. So we find out that Macy Gray is playing a character called Renee. Not a huge jump of a name, but it is what it is. So Johnny is all of a sudden talking to Renee, who he's sleeping next to. And so Renee is saying, it's like, well, hey, like you don't want to know why I'm here. And Johnny is just like, well, like, what happened to your face is more of what I'd want to know. Like, did they do that to you? And Renee is just like, no, like, I did that to myself. And Renee is going on and looking at Johnny and kind of sizing him up. She's like, you know what? Like, I'd really like your teeth. Like, can I have your teeth? So Renee all of a sudden starts getting closer and closer to Johnny, trying to like almost pull out his mouth. Johnny starts to get further and further away, and Renee's like, I'm just joking. Like, plus also, like, you have kind of a weird tooth, and I don't like stuff like that. So we can kind of figure out why Renee is freaking here. So We go on and we find out why Renee is here. She is to have this thing called Altelophobia. Altelophobia. The Altelophobia is an obsessive fear of imperfection. So, and she has like two different versions of this, where, and I'll let you know as the story goes along. So all of a sudden we have Renee, who is talking to this new hire, and Renee is to be part of this like architecture business. And so she's speaking to this new hire that's possibly going to be a new assistant of hers. And we have the secretary talking to this possible new hire and telling him, it's like, well, hey, like, you definitely need to watch out about about how like well you work here, and like you gotta make sure like you're on the up and up of things, or you're gonna get buried. And we're probably thinking that that's a like metaphorical buried, but so all of a sudden Renee is going on and looking at this guy's teeth and realizing that he has like perfect teeth, going through and drawing and sizing it up, like, yeah, like he has a perfect set of chompers there. So all of a sudden Renee is to go on and laugh about this guy's name, and he's just like, so he walks off. So it seems like this guy is going to be quickly hired. All of a sudden Renee is to get a phone call from her, I guess, father, who is to be her superior here, saying that I guess that these guys in this new building had not measured quite right this roof, and this was to cause a lot of problems. And so now Ray's kind of getting like the like she's getting chewed out because of this. She's getting ripped because of all this garbage she is taking from her father. So all of a sudden Renee is kind of telling her assistants, like, wait a minute, like, weren't you guys there to make sure that they measured? Like, how many times did they measure? Like, I want to know. And they said they measured it multiple times, and like they were actually physically there when they measured it, and so on and so forth. And so Renee's like, well, like this thing is like 6 degrees off, and it's just messing up the whole building. And so one of the assistants goes on and makes a joke about it. It's like, well, hey, like, then we'll be 1 degree closer to Kevin Bacon. Because 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Renee doesn't find that to be funny. So Renee is just like, well, all three of you assistants come to my house. We're going to have to go on and figure out all night how we're going to have to, like, figure out a way to, like, make up for this mistake. So these assistants go to this girl's house, and they're like, hey, like, we figured out this solution that's going to save us money and save us time and save us hopefully our lives, maybe. So Renee goes on and is to start being with all of her assistants, and so all of a sudden they're starting to drink and starting to have Chinese food. All of a sudden we start to have it where some of her assistants are all coughing. They're all choking. They're all... I'm feeling a little woozy here. Whoa, plop. Oops, my drink. Wow. All of a sudden, all three of these assistants are all down for the count. And so, Renee, because of that imperfect moment, all of a sudden is now going to take this out on all of her assistants. And so, now, Renee is going on and pulling out all of her assistants, and she's starting to find pieces of them that she could take. like as if she's like the Jeepers Creepers villain, and she's starting to like slice open them and take the stuff that she wants out, and she's going on and slicing into herself and starting to. We find out that we find this girl in her shower, and she has gone on and sewed herself up a number of times. And I'm like, oh my god. Like, this woman is basically the equivalent of Jeepers Creepers. But she has gone on and surgeried herself I don't know how many times now. She has a number of different fingers that all have a number of different nail polishes. And Renee was to have these black gloves, and the one guy was to ask, it's like, well, hey, why are you wearing those black gloves? And Renee mentions, it's like, oh, well, like, I usually go on and I'm just kind of fiddling with models, and it's very cold in this room, and I like to go on and just wear gloves. But we find out the reason why this girl wears gloves is because she has a number of different fingers with a number of different nail polishes. So I'm like, wow, okay, that's why. Because she had probably just sewed up her new fingers. Good grief. So that's why that woman is there. And so we have Johnny who barfs off to the side, and it's like gross. All of a sudden, Dr. Wright comes in, and he's like, okay, we need somebody next. We need somebody to come on down, because you're going to be the next contestant on Give Me That Fear. Give me that sweet, delicious fear. So, all of a sudden, it's finally Johnny's time to go into this chair, this table, this thing that is going to take down his fears. So, we're like, okay, so is Johnny going to have a brand new... Is he going to have a brand new video? Is he going to have a brand new story to give us? Or are we just going to reuse the same footage? What's going on here? So all of a sudden we find out that we just had to quickly get recapped quickly about what had happened to Johnny from the beginning of this story towards the end. And so all of a sudden when Johnny wakes up from his session, Johnny is to mention to Dr. Wright that Johnny's father was in here once before, and his father being here was the reason why Johnny's father had gotten sick and was dying. And so Johnny is going to seek revenge upon Dr. Wright for what he had done to his father. And so all of a sudden we have this artificial life form, this artificial intelligence that starts to attack Dr. Wright. And all of a sudden we have all these inmates that are trying to leave this asylum, so to speak. We, of course, have everybody who realizes they're going to have to get the heck out of there. Johnny is scrambling and telling these guys, like, okay, we're going to try to leave. And they're like, wait a minute, like, there's a number of guards. I don't think we're going to get out of here. And Johnny's like, I have a plan. So every one of these inmate characters are all wearing these gas masks, and they turn on this this little device that kind of shoots out this fear gas. And so now all these guards are facing this fear gas as these inmates are trying to leave this facility, and they go on and find this van. And everybody and their brother is trying to get the heck out of there from these inmates, like all like seemingly only like 6 or 7 of them, it seemed. But it seemed like there's a lot more in that place, but I guess the illusion of size. So these group of people all get in this van and scramble out of there. And we all of a sudden see Mr. Wright, who is now attached to one of these tables. And all of a sudden the artificial intelligence goes on and attacks Dr. Wright. and kills him and burns him up, and that's how the movie just ends. That's just how the movie rattles off. So, yeah, I apologize for how long that took, especially because this is like an hour and 25-minute movie, and I almost spoke for an hour, so that was kind of like, it is what it is with a lot of these stories, trying to get the right terms and stuff like that. But oh well. Let me know in the comments below if you were to ever see Phobias. Maybe you have a different version of a phobia movie that you've probably seen that you thought was really good. Then maybe will go on and possibly check it out. Because really, I just want to kind of go on and find a kind of a very interesting variety of horror films that kind of feel very unique. I don't want to go on and just go and find a number of easy slasher films. I want to find something that is just like, this is pretty nice. This is kind of unique. This is interesting. So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.